Charles William Richardson, more commonly known as Charlie Richardson, was one of the most infamous British gangsters of the 20th century. Alongside his brother Eddie Richardson, Charlie presided over a criminal empire in the 1960s that rivaled even the notorious Kray twins. Known for his ruthlessness, cunning business acumen, and penchant for brutal violence, Charlie Richardson and his gang, infamously dubbed the Torture Gang, left an indelible mark on London's underworld. Welcome back to Crime Chronicles. Today we look at the life of Charlie Richardson, his life as a gangster, and the ultra-violent tendencies that made him a top dog of the London underworld. He was born on January the 18th of 1934 in Brentford, Middlesex, a suburb in West London. Being born in the lead up to World War II, Charlie Richardson would spend his formative years during a time of post-war hardship. His family struggled financially after his father abandoned them, and Charlie left school at an early age to support them. Early exposure to the harsh realities of life in South London shaped his ambition and his willingness to take risks. Charlie's entrepreneurial spirit initially found legitimate outlets. As a young man, he worked as an electrician, eventually establishing a scrap metal business with his brother Eddie. However, the scrap trade soon became a front for less legitimate ventures. By the late 1950s, the Richardson brothers had begun dabbling in a variety of criminal enterprises, from protection rackets to fraud and loan sharking. The Richardsons' operations truly began to take off in the early 1960s. At its peak, the Richardson Gang operated across London and into the southeast of England. While the Kray twins controlled much of East London, the Richardsons dominated South London. The gang was involved in a range of illegal activities, including extortion, drug trafficking, and money laundering. What set the Richardsons apart from other gangs of the era was their organizational structure and their brutal methods of enforcing loyalty and discipline. Charlie, in particular, was known for his business-like approach to crime. He had a knack for networking and building relationships with influential figures, including corrupt police officers and politicians. The Richardson Gang earned the nickname the Torture Gang due to their infamous methods of extracting information and punishing those who crossed them. Charlie's favoured techniques included using pliers to pull out teeth, nailing victims to the floor, and administering electric shocks with a portable generator. These methods were designed to instill fear and maintain the gang's dominance. One of the most notorious cases involved a man named Johnny Bradbury, a former associate accused of betraying the gang. Bradbury was subjected to hours of torture at the hands of the Richardsons, an event that cemented their fearsome reputation in the criminal underworld. Unlike many gangsters who thrived solely on brute force, Charlie Richardson had a strategic mind. He sought to build a criminal empire that extended beyond street-level violence. His ventures included fraud schemes, counterfeit currency operations, and even international arms dealing. Charlie also had a taste for luxury, and often mingled with celebrities and influential figures, blurring the lines between legitimate business and organized crime. However, his flamboyant lifestyle and connections eventually drew the attention of law enforcement. The rivalry between the Richardson Gang and the Kray twins is one of the most well-documented feuds in British criminal history. While the Krays controlled East London with their mix of charm and violence, the Richardsons were known for their cold-blooded ruthlessness. The two gangs occasionally clashed, and tensions escalated into violent confrontations. One such incident occurred at a nightclub in Catford, where members of the Kray gang reportedly exchanged blows with Richardson associates. Despite their animosity, both gangs shared an uneasy mutual respect. Charlie Richardson's criminal empire began to crumble in 1966. following a series of events that exposed the gang's activities to the police. The turning point came when an associate of the gang, George Cornell, was murdered by Ronnie Kray in the Blind Beggar pub. The killing, though not directly linked to the Richardson Gang, led to increased scrutiny of London's criminal underworld. Shortly thereafter, Charlie Richardson was arrested during a raid on a party in South London. Memorably, he was arrested on the day that England won the Football World Cup. The police discovered evidence linking him and his gang to multiple crimes, including torture, extortion, and fraud. In 1967, Charlie Richardson and several members of his gang stood trial at the Old Bailey in what became known as the torture trial. The trial revealed the full extent of the gang's brutality, shocking the British public. Witnesses recounted horrifying tales of violence, including electric shock torture, the use of iron bars and bolt cutters, and mock trials where victims were judged and sentenced by the gang. Charlie was convicted on multiple charges, including grievous bodily harm and conspiracy to commit fraud. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, a term that effectively ended his reign as a gangland boss. While in prison, Charlie Richardson maintained his defiant persona, claiming that he had been unfairly targeted by the authorities. In 1980, after many attempts to obtain release, Charlie Richardson took matters into his own hands and escaped from an open prison. He remained on the run for almost a year, even dressing as Santa Claus and giving out presents to children to publicize his requests for release. He openly drank with friends and old associates, including police officers, at several pubs on the Old Kent Road before fleeing to Paris, where he gave an interview to a journalist. He was eventually rearrested and returned to prison before being permanently released in 1984, after serving the majority of his original sentence. By this time, London's criminal landscape had changed significantly, and the era of the old-school gangster was largely over. In his later years, Charlie attempted to reinvent himself as a businessman and public figure. He published an autobiography, My Manor, the autobiography of Charlie Richardson, in which he recounted his life story and reflected on his criminal past. He also gave interviews in which he expressed regret for some of his actions, though he remained unapologetic about his methods, viewing them as necessary for survival in the cutthroat world of organized crime. Charlie Richardson passed away on September 19th of 2012 at the age of 78 from emphysema and blood poisoning. His death marked the end of an era in British criminal history, where old-school criminals ruled with violence and fear, while at the same time enjoying celebrity status. Despite his violent and criminal past, Charlie remains a controversial figure. Some see him as a ruthless gangster who thrived on fear and brutality, while others view him as a shrewd businessman who played the hand he was dealt. The Richardson Gang's legacy is inseparable from the dark and violent history of London's underworld. In the annals of British crime, Charlie Richardson's name stands alongside those of other notorious figures like the Kray twins, cementing his place as one of the most infamous gangsters in London's history. Thank you for joining us today on Crime Chronicles. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel with your friends.